Okay, today we're going to be looking at what would happen if Cyprus was just like magically extremely powerful. If you haven't seen my What If History Restarted series, then first of all, watch that. And second of all, you would know, well, if you watch it, you would know that Cyprus is a pretty important country in that series. So, obviously, it's going to be kind of inspired by myself. But anyway, Cyprus just becomes powerful all of a sudden somehow. And also, magically, all world alliances are just like dissolved, so there's no NATO or anything like that. So Cyprus wants to expand, and their first target's going to be over here in Lebanon. So, Cyprus launches an invasion over here on the coast of Lebanon. There's not much Lebanon can really do since Cyprus got a pretty major power boost. So they simply just roll through the country. They separate it in two. I'm not sure where Beirut is, but I'm sure they capture that. And from there, the entire country just crumbles. Peace treaties are going to be simple, fully annexed. After that, though, they're going to avoid this mess and instead go to Syria. But Syria is also kind of a mess, so that's because there's obviously like ISIS rebels up here. And I'm not too familiar with the war, but I'm pretty sure there's also like Turkish-backed rebels. This could be inaccurate. I'm not an expert on the Syria civil war or anything, but I think it's like this. I think there might even be like another little thing down here. So Cyprus is going to officially declare war on Syria. And I mean, that's just going to put the final nail in the coffin, because look at this. So they quickly capture whatever coast Syria still controls before pushing down here. This allows for the other rebels to make some big advances inland. And Turkey also officially joins in on the war. Now, Turkey is kind of weird because they are the only country, I believe, who recognizes northern Cyprus as a country. Cyprus itself is like divided up in real life. There's northern Cyprus, which is, like I said, only recognized by Turkey. There's also some like British controlled areas. Obviously, we're just ignoring that, but we'll still do this just to show that northern Cyprus is kind of occupied in a way. But regardless, over here at Syria, the main Syrian government just completely crumbles. Damascus, I think, is right here at the bottom, so it's cut off from the rest of the country by these guys. ISIS starts making big land gains. Turkey starts completely pushing in, because now they've officially declared war. Leaving Cyprus not actually even get that much land out of this, because, well, they barely have any of it occupied. So instead, they are able to capture the city, but the rest of this is just taken. But there's still conflicts going on between these four parties, especially over here. Turkey begins to push into ISIS, as well as this green team. But Cyprus starts pushing into that green team, so it's a big old fight. The green team starts to kind of like crumble. I'd imagine they're probably the weakest, so they kind of just implode. And at this point, they just decide to solve for peace. Only issue is now this is sort of reignited northern Cyprus debate. So Turkey and Cyprus cut a deal. Cyprus will officially be in control of northern Cyprus, even recognized by Turkey. But Turkey is going to get more land than they would have otherwise in the peace treaty. And looking at that, if we uncolor Turkey. First of all, Turkey is going to get a big chunk of land. It's probably like half the country, if not more. So they're definitely satisfied with this. ISIS, they're also going to get this little panhandle. Whoa. And the world just turned into Wicso for a second. But anyway, ISIS, whatever they are, they're independent. I don't even know if they're fighting for... What is ISIS, like, fighting for? I don't know if they're trying to overthrow the government or become independent. But anyway, they're just independent. We'll say that. And finally, the rest of the southern land is going to go to Cyprus. Now, this kind of threw a wrench in Cyprus's plans. They really didn't even want to go that far inland. They more just wanted the coastal area. But unfortunately, that did not work out. Now, unlike in my What If History Started series, in real life, I believe that Cyprus and Greece have pretty good relations. So because of that, the two of them are going to make an alliance. Greece will be colored in dark red to show that they're an alliance, but not Cyprus controlled. So, if we give them all their Aegean islands, Greece and Cyprus officially begin, like a strong alliance. They ask other members if they want to join in. The only one we have joining is surprisingly Syria. This quickly became like an anti-Turkey alliance, but it still works. Iran does not like Turkey, I don't think, right? So, yeah, they consider joining, but they don't. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe them and Turkey are allies, but I'm pretty sure they're enemies. So, anyway, down here in ISIS land and Iraq, the two of them are beginning to have their tensions raised. Eventually, it's going to culminate. Well, I guess it'll be yellow. Iraq declares war on ISIS land. I still don't know what you would call that. But Iraq is going to push in here and quickly eat up this new country, even though it will probably just became independent like a couple months ago. I can't talk. Now this widens the border a little bit between Cyprus and Iraq, but even if they were to go to war and Cyprus were to win, this would be weird looking, and I don't think it would work out that well. So instead, Cyprus is going to convince Iraq to join the alliance, but they have plans to backstab them eventually. But Greece, Cyprus, and Georgia all know that they're going to backstab Iraq. It's just Iraq that obviously doesn't know. Anyway, they would go to war with Turkey, but Turkey's still probably stronger than all of them combined, so they do need to get just a little bit stronger. So what Cyprus goes ahead and does is they fund Georgia to start invading Armenia. Now, I don't know what the relations between Georgia and Armenia are in real life, but at this point, even if they're allies, Georgia just wants more land. I'd imagine they aren't allies, but they could be. But either way, Georgia starts pushing into Armenia, but Turkey has to get involved again with this war, so they start pushing into Armenia too, with their ally Azerbaijan also joining in, quickly reconnecting this panhandle. Turkey isn't focusing too much, so Georgia still is able to get a good amount, but it's still not that much. As for the peace treaty these guys come up with, it's pretty much going to follow these war borders, the occupied zones, whatever you want to call it. And it's going to look something like this. Georgia gets this chunk, and the rest is split up between Turkey and Azerbaijan, with Azerbaijan finally looking normal. However, even though Cyprus, Iraq, I'm just going to call it the anti-Turkey alliance, even though they haven't, actually said anything to Iran yet, Iran is going to go ahead and invade Turkey anyway, because they feel the tension. They don't necessarily start invading Turkey, but they go for Azerbaijan first, and they know that Turkey's going to follow soon, so it might as well just be invading Turkey. But anyway, they push up to Azerbaijan, take over this peninsula, this part, and they start kind of rolling through the country. But then Turkey joins in on the war. So, because of this, Iran's going to request for the anti-Turkey alliance to help out, and they are going to agree. Now, this is good because Turkey is like completely surrounded by this. So, Cyprus is going to launch their invasion from their newly claimed lands, as well as a small naval operation here. Greece is going to start rolling into Thrace and making a bunch of naval invasions on the Aegean coast. Aegean, not Asian. And Georgia's just going to start a minor push in from here, as well as into Azerbaijan. Now, what's important to note there is that Iran still isn't on the same side as the anti-Turkey alliance. It's kind of like a three-way thing, where it's just 1v1v1. Well, except it's 4v1v2. But Iran is more friendly with the anti-Turkey alliance than Turkey by this point. Turkey still is not to be underestimated, but they do, now that there's Iran on their side, kind of on their side, it's definitely looking a little bit better. Especially since Iran does not invade Iraq, at least yet, like they thought they might. But anyway, Turkey and Azerbaijan start focusing mostly on liberating. Why is it doing that? Turkey and Azerbaijan mostly focus on liberating Azerbaijan as well as pushing into this region. I'm pretty sure Iran has some pretty tough geography. I think there's some mountains and desert. So, the invasion there is going to go kind of slowly. Over here, Turkey, I'm sure, has already been like preparing for Greece to invade. So they managed to push them out of Thrace, as well as most of this Aegean land. I keep saying Asian. I mean Aegean. Aegean. And even past that, Turkey begins to invade Greece itself. Cyprus is going better for, though. They've completely connected up these two front lines and now have been pushing in from each, as well as getting help from Iraq. I mean, I don't think Iraq is in, like, direct civil war right now, but, like, it's still definitely very unstable, so they aren't able to do too much. Same goes with Georgia, because they're mostly focused on Azerbaijan. In fact, Turkey does manage to push them back a little bit. Anyway, Iran is completely pushed out of Azerbaijan, and by now the front line has gone all the way back to here. And this has worked pretty well, because a lot of Turkey's forces are over here, so that's definitely distracted them. The anti-Turkey alliance wouldn't have been able to make this much gain if it weren't for that. Especially now that Greece and Cyprus's front lines over here get united, and now start pushing all the way up, just rolling through a lot of Anatolia. Turkey, though, does still continue to push into Greece, though their invasion is eventually slowed down, not completely stopped, though. And they do manage to push out Georgia. Azerbaijan, though, really can't catch a break because Georgia has just rolled through them again, as well as push a little... Yeah. And Iran, obviously, like I said, it's been beneficial because most of Turkey is distracted over here. But now Iran is starting to feel a little sort of betrayed by the anti-Turkey alliance because, you know, all that's happened really so far is that they've lost land. So while it's not that major, they are going to begin a small invasion into Iraq. I'm pretty sure this border here is very old, so that's kind of sad to see it probably end up going, but oh well. Now Turkey obviously is very in support of this, and in fact they actually start sending a lot of their troops over here to try and like crumble Iraq, which I mean would probably work pretty well. But this does allow for Greece to push them out of their country, as well as recapturing Thrace. Well, most of Thrace. Thrice, I think is how it's pronounced. They aren't able to capture Istanbul, but they do push around the Sea of Marmara and take a lot of Anatolia. They almost cut it in half, but not quite. Georgia has been doing nothing. Them and Turkey are just kind of stalemated along this border. But at this point, they completely push out Azerbaijan, as well as launching a counter-offensive, I guess, into Iraq. They're like invading the lands that Turkey invaded in Iran. It's weird. They do also manage to make a naval invasion over here on the Caspian Sea. This really, isn't even that strong. Like, Iran could pretty easily push it out. It was really just supposed to be a surprise attack to help distract them. Iran has slightly ramped up their Iraq invasion, now pushing them all the way to here. I'm not sure where Baghdad is. I think it's like there. Obviously, it's smaller than that, but so they start. We'll just pretend it's there, and they start encircling the city, as well as taking over the southern coast. Turkey has finally began to actually go defensive now, pushing back this little panhandle. They try to reconnect up to the sea, but that doesn't go too well, and neither they have a very unsuccessful counterattack from Thrace. They just immediately get pushed back and just lose troops. As Istanbul, this half of Istanbul finally falls. Istanbul's not their capital, but is their most important city, so it still would not be good for them to lose it. Their more defensive now style of fighting has let Georgia make a actually pretty major invasion. I mean, Georgia, for how powerful they are, is definitely doing pretty good in this war. I mean, this naval invasion does get kicked out, like I said. But anyway, Turkey and Georgian troops kind of working together, at least a little bit, just for the greater good, start pushing more into Iran. Tehran, I think, is here about, so they're getting pretty close to it. But they take over the entire Caspian coast. Now, one thing that's definitely been helping them is that the anti-Turkey alliance, and maybe even Turkey, even though they're, well, probably not. So we'll just say the anti-Turkey alliance has been funded by Saudi Arabia to help get back at Iran. Saudi Arabia doesn't want to officially join the war, but they do want to see Iran gone, so they are helping the anti-Turkish push into Iran. Obviously, that's not going that well for them, though, because Iraq is getting dismantled from most two sides. This does make Cyprus feel a little scared, since they are getting kind of close. Funny how this video is about Cyprus, but this is all the land that they've claimed so far. It's barely anything. But they'll be bigger, I swear. Anyway, Cyprus and Greece, they launch a very big invasion over here in the Sea of Marmara. There's a very bloody battle as Istanbul goes under siege, but eventually the red team is victorious and they take the city. This is a major loss for Turkey, as they now, are completely hidden out in Ankara, which is which is their actual capital. So I guess they aren't really hidden. But either way, also as another devastating loss, Cyprus and Georgia managed to connect their front lines, making supplying Georgia much easier, as well as separating Anatolia. This chunk of Turkish troops kind of realizes that it's over for them, so they essentially just leave Turkey and Iraq, and they start a really big invasion into Iran. They capture Tehran, somewhere in there probably, as well as sweeping through this northern coast. They do also help liberate a little bit of Azerbaijan, but it's not too much. The anti-Turkish troops are now able to sort of reconnect up here, but this does allow for Iran to make some more advances in Iraq. Speaking of Iran, they managed to push back the majority of this Turkish invasion. That's very uncoordinated and just kind of a bunch of troops running at the country. Turkey begins to crumble. There's a lot of rebellions and revolts and protests of the war, and so after Ankara falls and the coastline is captured, Turkey officially surrenders. This makes Azerbaijan also surrender because they are about to die anyway. Their troops leave Iran, leaving it as just the anti-Turkish alliance and Iran. Saudi Arabia only supports the anti-Turkins more. I know Turkin isn't a word, but it just sounds right, so I'm going to keep saying Turkin. And so they are able to mostly push Iran out of Iraq, as well as launching a big invasion not that big, but a invasion up here. Iraq manages to go along and recapture the coast, isolating these troops who are killed. They then push Iran out of their country and launch a counter-invasion. From here, the war gets kind of stalematy, as most of the troops of the anti-Turkins are very exhausted. So all of the countries are now going to finally, solve for peace. So now we're going to look at what happened here. Starting over in the west with Greece, they're going to be getting almost all of Thrace, just not Istanbul, as well as a lot of this Aegean Sea coastal area. Georgia is also going to be getting a lot bigger. They did surprisingly well in this war, so they kind of get rewarded by the anti-Turkish alliance. They get a very good chunk of both Turkey and Azerbaijan, leaving them like this big. And maybe even this tiny bit of Iran. As for Iran, they annex the rest of Azerbaijan. Kind of weird border, but they're fine with it. Iraq is going to get a decent chunk of land out of them too. Not that major, but still some. The border is going to look a little something like this. Also for Iran, just adding to how terrible the borders are, they are also going to get a good chunk of Turkey. So, yeah, this is just gonna look absolutely great on the map. Yeah. But either way, it's now time for Cyprus finally, who is kind of seen as like the leader of the anti-Turkish alliance. I didn't call them Turkin, but so because of that, they're going to get a hefty piece of land down here. They're allowed to take all of this, and now they are very big. Well, not very big, but they're like compared to how big they were before. The anti-Turkin alliance is still a thing. I'm going to call Turkish Turkin from now on in every video, because I know it's going to make people mad. And so we have that big Georgia and Iraq. He was probably very unstable now. They might have went back into civil war, but oh well. Iran, as part of the peace treaty, Iran is not allowed to go to war with the Turkish alliance and vice versa. You know what? Maybe we're gonna say this gets this might be Kurdistan. I'm not sure, but this gets made as an Iran puppet state. So I guess we'll just do that. So that's, helps the border go a little. The rest of Turkey probably remains relatively unchanged. Yeah. Now, Cyprus is going to do their own solo things for a little. First of all, they're definitely going to go for Jordan. They're a pretty weak country. They don't really have much support. And everyone's kind of too scared to go to war with Cyprus. It's probably been a few years since the end of this big Middle Eastern war, and so Cyprus has rebuilt, and with all this new territory, they've definitely gotten a lot stronger. They're probably almost as strong as Greece now. And anyway, they're going to immediately cut Jordan off here before traveling on this Israel-Palestine border. They then crunch in the southern half. This northern half capitulates, and yeah, it's just over in a couple of weeks. Next up is, I think we can tell. I don't actually know what this war looks like currently. I don't know where the front lines are between Israel and Palestine. But, so we're just going to color them in and not have any front lines. But either way, Cyprus does not care for either of them. So they're immediately going to invade through, cutting them down the middle. And that's because they're so war-torn and disoriented by now that they really, even though Israel is fairly strong, they still really aren't able to, defend against Cyprus with the current state they're in. So now they're finally, both Israel and Palestine are going to be united under one, which is probably going to be terrible, but unfortunately we're going to ignore that because I don't want to have to deal with a civil war every 5 minutes. Now, Cyprus really has only one more place they could go, and that would be Egypt. However, that's not actually true, because Turkey, there was that peace treaty that just allowed, Iran from going to war with the anti-Turkins, but there's nothing stopping the anti-Turkins from going back to war with Turkey. So, for literally no reason, Cyprus is just gonna invade Turkey. They don't have any motivation. They just tell the world that this is right for them to do. So, they immediately move up here. Turkey has been severely weakened. They're still recovering from war. It's not mandatory for the other three nations in this alliance to join in, but Georgia still does, because sure. And yeah, I mean, it's not pretty. Cyprus immediately cuts them off, and then isolates Istanbul, then work together with Georgia to take this entire coast, including Ankara. This just crumbles. This peace capitulates. Greece sends in some troops which conquer Istanbul along with help from Cyprus. And yeah, from here it just dies. Rest in peace. No, this was obviously very greedy. It was literally just because they wanted more land out of this country, which they already beat back. But no one else is really going to do anything. So first of all, Georgia is going to get a good amount of coast of the Black Sea. Iraq, even though they weren't on this war, they still are going to get a sliver of land over here, just to make them stronger, since they are in the alliance with Cyprus. Well, we'll save them for last. Greece really isn't going to get that much land, like territory-wise, in terms of how big it is, but they're going to get Istanbul, which I'm sure they rename it Constantinople, and obviously that's pretty major. The people there probably aren't going to be too happy, but Greece does not care. And as for Cyprus, they're going to be taking pretty much everything from Turkey. They're just going to leave them as this sad little puppet state up in the north here. So, from now, the only thing that they could really do to an external country is invade Egypt. But Egypt is pretty strong, and seeing all this, they've probably just buffed up their military even more because they don't want to risk war. Well, they can foresee that they might go to war, so they want to be sure that they win. But there still is that backup plan of betraying Iraq, and so the other three countries are going to go along with this in the anti-Turkish alliance. So, they officially kick out Iraq and then immediately invade it again. Like I said, it's probably plunged back into civil war, so it's even weaker already than it would be normally. All three countries send their troops down to Cyprus, well, four technically, because that's a puppet state of Cyprus. And then Iraq even joins in, but this time since they aren't allowed to go to war with these guys, they're just jointly invading Iraq, and yeah, it just crumbles. They probably are gonna get rid of all the people who are rebelling and causing civil war. So now it's just going to be split straight down the middle. Well, not straight, but it's going to be split relatively down the middle. And we'll give some land to Iraq's puppet state. So Iraq's puppet state gets this. I guess we'll call them Kurdistan. I don't think this is where Kurdistan is, but I think it's kind of close, so we'll say it is Kurdistan. Iran gets this land. Saudi Arabia is upset now, but they aren't going to do anything. And then finally, Cyprus gets this land. The other three countries in the anti-Turkish alliance, which, we're just going to call it the Levantine alliance now, because this is the Levantine Sea. But the Levantine alliance, the other three members joined in because Cyprus promises to give them a lot of the resources here. I'm pretty sure they have a lot of oil, so they are going to be getting a good amount of that. And partially with those new resources, they're going to be doing their final thing today, which is invading Egypt. Egypt, like I said, is pretty strong, so that's kind of unfortunate. But what Egypt starts actually, even though they were declared war on, they managed to make the first move, pushing into this up here, and that's just because they're already prepared for war. However, though, that wasn't the plan of the Levantine alliance was not to even to, you know, go through here because they knew that would be what Egypt expects. Instead, they make a really big naval landing up here on the Nile River Delta. From here, they start pushing along these coasts. I think they might have already captured both Cairo and Alexandria. But Egypt obviously kind of recoils, and they actually have a very successful counteroffensive, reclaiming both of those major cities and leaving just this little chunk up here. Now, Cyprus begins to invade the Sinai Peninsula, meeting up with the Suez Canal, making a landing down here from the Sinai Peninsula, which then completely capitulates the Sinai Canal. Egypt is about to push these guys all the way out, but Greece sends down another big fleet, which helps rejuvenate it. It goes back to the Nile River Delta as Cyprus' troops move there too, as well as Georgia and this thing, you can't really even call this Turkey. We'll just call it Ankara, because I'm pretty sure it still is in this, like right there. But all these countries now begin a big push down the Nile River of Egypt, which I believe goes like that. They also take this coast, a little bit more of this northern land where it still is fairly fertile and not desert. They completely take this Red Sea coast, but there's one issue with this. This involves the Habib Triangle, which is kind of claimed by Sudan. So Sudan is going to take this as an act of war, and they are going to join in as their own side. Following this is also Libya joining in just to try and get some extra land on the same side as Sudan. However, even then, there still is more because South Sudan also has border disputes with Sudan, so now they're going to be joining on the side of the Levantine alliance. So, quickly this kind of spilled over into a Northeast African war. But anyway, the Nile River is claimed, but Sudan manages to push back into the Habib Triangle, completely taking it over. Most of the Levantine forces are still in Egypt, but of the 20% that aren't, another 80% of those are just going into Libya. Tripoli, I'm pretty sure, is here, so they still have got a long way to go, but they're making their way there. South Sudan and Sudan, I believe, are both pretty unstable, but we're going to say that Sudan in these following years has more or less got their things together. Meanwhile, South Sudan has not. South Sudan is kind of seen as a distraction, and Sudan is able to pretty quickly tear through most of the country. As for Libya, they do continue their walking through the desert here. I mean, I don't know why they even want this, but sure. Sudan also does the same. Egypt, by now, is just crumbling. Libya is still not able to stop this invasion, though, as their entire northern coast is claimed. And eventually they do probably the smart thing and just opt out of the war. Now these troops are redirected down here, where they push into the Nile River of Sudan a little bit more. Sudan completely pushes out South Sudan and begins to focus more of their troops up here. Although, the Levantines are able to obliterate what's left of Libya. Well, what's left of the Libyan forces in Egypt. So, but because of that distraction over here, Sudan is mostly able to push them out of the country. And from here, they're actually going to agree to peace because everyone involved is very tired of fighting. So now we gotta take a look at how this peace treaty turns out. So, first of all, Sudan is going to be re-annexing most of South Sudan because, like I said, it's unstable. They just don't want some of it because they know it's going to cause civil war. So they actually only really take half, but that still is more than enough for them, and they're gonna manage all the rebellious people there as best as they can. Libya obviously did not end up too well, but we're going to get to them when we get there. The Levantines are going to be taking a big chunk out of Egypt. They are going to capture all of this northern land. They kind of avoid most of the Nile River Delta because, it's very important to Egypt. And like I said, they are going to be taking a lot of land. So it doesn't look like a lot, but remember that, this is useless and desert. So, this is a pretty good chunk of Egypt, especially since, that's where all of their important parts are. And they also are going to be taking this northern coast of Libya. Cyprus I'm taking all of that. Sudan is officially not only going to get control over the Habib Triangle, but they also are just going to get a bunch of borderlands up here. Rest in peace, that one guy who claimed Bertawil to make his daughter a princess. I don't know if that's going to work anymore. As for what's left of Libya, Greece is also going to get a colony over here. In fact, it's actually going to be a lot bigger than that. It is going to be this entire chunk over here, which involves Tripoli, their capital. This leaves Libya pretty useless now, as they're mostly just desert. They relocate their capital up here, though. But, they're very crippled. They do, I guess, get a little bit of Egypt, but that's not really going to help that much since this is also just desert. But yeah, right along the Nile. So this is how it's turned out. Cyprus has made themselves a Cypriot empire. They have their nice little alliance. They have one puppet state up here, and we'll say the rest of Egypt is a puppet state too. So they have 2 puppet states, 2 allies, and they don't have good relations with Iran. Pretty terrible relations, but, oops. If we take a look at just them isolated, which I can do. Bam. And, bam. This is the new Cyprus map. Well, in this timeline. So they have a good piece of Anatolia, a lot of Mesopotamia, if not all of Mesopotamia, and all of the Levantine Sea coastal areas, good portion of the Nile River Delta, the Sinai Peninsula and Suez Canal. And yeah, that's going to do it for this video. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe and check out What If History Restarted and my other videos. And goodbye.